I've got a bit of a weird one for you today. I want to talk about hotkeys, specifically default hotkeys. This is something that I am oddly obsessed with. I think that hotkeys can have an outsized impact on the enjoyability of your game for the amount of effort that you need to put into them. And I think default hotkeys are especially important because you can't expect every player to go in and rebind the hotkeys to their preferences. I don't just want to talk about the hotkeys in games, though. I want to talk about them as a metaphor, as an analogy for the way that we approach creative design, right? These default hotkeys, we kind of take them for granted. We don't go in and change them all the time. In the same way, we can look at our creative process and there are elements of it that we don't dig into, that we don't look at and go, oh, maybe I can change that to be more effective. Maybe I can change that to be a more enjoyable part of the process. So I'm going to stretch a little bit with this hotkey metaphor, but I'm excited about it. So we're going to let it go just a little too far at moments and become just a little bit too large of a metaphor. But I think it's worthwhile because it presents an interesting idea. Not a particularly literal idea, but an interesting one at least. I am your host, Chris, and this is Game, Develop, Repeat. How many games have you played that had horrific default settings? How many times have you gone in on a game and been like, oh no, what is going on? Why does this have... I mean, oftentimes these days it's a graphical setting that somebody hates, right? Somebody will go in and go, why does this have blur? I don't want motion blur. Oh, God. Oh. I need borderless window because I need to be going to this other tab for this, that, the other, right? Sometimes you run into this. But also, bad hotkeys. This, I think, is an old problem. I don't think this is as common now as it used to be. I think probably still around a lot in indie games, right? But bad hotkeys were a thing of my childhood for sure. I remember specifically playing a Mechwarriors game. I believe it was Mechwarriors 3. It may have been Mechwarriors 2 Mercenaries. I just glanced at some footage. Pretty sure it was Mechwarriors 3. That had the worst keyboard hotkeys ever. I hated these keyboard hotkeys. I don't remember what they were because my brother, God bless him, rebound all of these hotkeys, made them so much better, used WASD movement for like acceleration and deceleration and all of these other things to just make it more playable. Now, in the defense of this game, it was designed for a joystick, and I don't think they really expected most people to even play it on a controller. But here I was playing it on a a keyboard. Here I was playing it on a keyboard with these gnarly hotkeys. I could not play it with the original hotkeys. I couldn't do it. And then when I got those changed, which I didn't even think of doing because I was a child, when my brother reset them all and corrected them to make them more usable, suddenly it was extremely fun. I was like, oh my God, this is a great game. This is a phenomenal time. I've had this experience with several games. Most recently, I played Dustforce on stream, and when I started playing Dustforce, people were like, hey, are you a pinky dasher? And I was like, I don't know, I'm using the default hotkeys. And they're like, oh, you're going to want to change pinky. You're going to want to change that because you're going to be using dash a lot. You're going to break your pinky. They weren't very forceful with it, but they kind of made the suggestion softly, and then I went, okay, let me try. Oh, this is way better. I was just going to go with the default. I was like, this is what they set up. I assume that the game developers have my best interests at heart. I assume they've thought this through thoroughly, and I assume that they know best. But sometimes the game developer doesn't know best, and that's why we have key rebinding, right? Because sometimes the players find out down the road, they're like, oh, this hotkey is actually horrible. Whoever designed it has a very different ergonomic liking than I do. Like they like their hand shape to be different than mine, or my pinky is longer than theirs, or whatever. Fact of the matter is, sometimes you get a default hotkey that is physically painful, like that one in Dustforce. And then you have large systems of keys, things where you have to learn all of these different button presses. I think of Warcraft 3. I think of StarCraft. I think of old war strategy games where there are keys all the way across the keyboard. I can even go further back to the earlier Warcraft games, which I did not really play, by the way. I looked at them as a curiosity after we got the battle chest at one point. The Warcraft battle chest. For those of you, oh my God, back in the day. Oh, nostalgia hit. That big cardboard box with all the Warcraft games in it. My God, I miss it. Imagine if every time you got one of those big Steam bundles, it was like in a box and you got to read the box on the way home and you open it and it has a certain smell to it. It's like getting a new book. Man, those were good days. Okay, anyway, we got the Warcraft 3 battle chest and we played Warcraft 1 or 2 a little bit and we noticed the evolution of like being able to move things. There was a point in Warcraft where like there wasn't right click move. You had to click a move button, right? You had to click, and this is not turn based. This is a real time strategy game where you have to click a button to move. Or maybe they gave you a hotkey for it, but you couldn't just right click to move. And now that is like a standard convention across games, right? These things had to evolve. But anyway, to the more modern games, for that time period at least, more modern Warcraft 3, StarCraft, there were hotkeys that were assigned based on just the names of things. And some of them made no sense. It was like, we're trying to do the first letter of all these things so that it's something you easily remember, but F is already taken, so I guess footman will be M. And you're throwing your hand across the entire keyboard, basically, right? You're going from A to P on the keyboard. You're stretching the whole way across. You're jumping over. And when you're in a fast-paced game like this, you don't have time to stretch that far. You don't have the ability to just accurately hit all of these keys at such a fast pace. I mean, people got good at it, let's be clear, but it slows you down significantly. And you'd think it would be easier to learn because they've got the names. In fact, when my brother made custom hotkeys for this game, I was resistant to them because I was like, no, I know these hotkeys. And he's like, no. Trust me, just try this. And I tried it for like a day, and then I was like, you were so right. Oh my God, this is incredible. I'm crushing people on this game now because I don't have to move my left hand. My left hand is just chilling. QWERT, ASDFG. ZXC. That was it. Those were all the buttons I needed. Just that little left-hand bundle. And nowadays, that's what we do. And I think I've even mentioned this on the podcast before, but nowadays, that is like the design for a war strategy game. That is the design for a MOBA game. That's what people do to have some smooth left-hand hotkeys so you don't have to be jumping around the keyboard, so you don't have to be taking your hand off the mouse to go hit something on the right side of your keyboard. It's marvelous. But it took somebody going, you know what? Actually, maybe people are willing to learn this like weird little grid-based like Q through C system on a QWERTY keyboard. Like maybe people are willing to learn this whole system, and it'll be easier for them to learn than to just know like, oh, footman F means footman, like, and then learn a different set of hotkeys for every race. So then you're looking at the underlying game design principles and you're saying, okay, easiest to build, like, simple unit is assigned to Q, right? And then it's like, oh, first melee unit that's like kind of tanky is going to be W. And you like go through this system of, oh, how pricey is the unit? You have to organize it. You have to think through it a little bit. But then, oh, it's a beautiful thing. Then your game is so playable. Your game is so enjoyable. There's one less obstacle in the way of you getting good at the game, which is lovely. And then you've got a game like Gothic, something that has its own angle on a control scheme from a time period where people had not yet established a very standard system of RPG movement, where everything is WASD, spacebar, click F or E to interact, boom, done. Maybe you open your inventory with tab, something else, whatever. This has a weird inventory system. It has a bizarre way of interacting with the world. It has strange controls for the way that you do combat, and it's fascinating, and it's great. And I get excited about it because it's an evolution of hotkeys that we could have had. It's a whole different path that we could have gone down, and it's interesting, and it's over-engineered. And I think I've even talked about this once before in the podcast, but the uniqueness of this hotkey system is so cool. It's so interesting. And I can't wait to dive into that game one day. I've only really played it like 20, 30 minutes just to get a feel for it, just to kind of explore what is going on in this old, just to do a little archaeology, honestly. To go in there and go, what was this like back then? And I love that era of RPG a lot. So I can't wait to play that game one of these days. I kind of want to play it in German. That's one of the reasons I'm delaying, because my German is really not polished right now, and I need to step up my German a little bit if I'm going to play it in German. But like, man, I'm looking forward to that one of these days. So the point here is there's so many different angles of approach, and I think these days it gets a little more standardized, but the impact of these hotkey systems is enormous. I never would have enjoyed Mechwarrior 3 if I hadn't had somebody to say, hey, here's some better hotkeys. I would have never gotten very good at Warcraft 3 if somebody hadn't gone, hey, here's a system that you can easily understand and transfer across different races within the game. I wouldn't be as fascinated by Gothic as I am now if it didn't have this strange foreign control scheme. And honestly, games like Celeste, games like, any number of games across any genre, they benefit from the mistakes of the past enormously, and these issues that people have had and figured out, and all these pain points that customers have had where you go, oh, I hate these hotkeys. And even if every single key in the game is rebindable, the game designer should give the player the best chance of not having to mess with those rebindings, right? You should give the player an easy, smooth, plug-and-play experience with the option of rebinding everything. But you kind of want to go, hey, this is what we're designed for. If you want to change it, I got you, no problem. Here's where you can change it. Maybe even give them a little invitation for that if you think it's particularly likely that they'll want to. But you give them that setup and you go, hey, here's what we think is ideal. Here's, just give it, Then they can give it the 10, 20 minutes. This also, as a tangent, drives me crazy when a game does not specify whether or not you should use a gamepad for it. When a game is like, we have no formal recommendation for gamepad versus mouse and keyboard. Because generally speaking, one of them is better than the other. Usually, if you're playing a game on PC and it was designed to be cross-platform, one of these is superior to the other, and I'm going to need you to tell me. There are some rare instances where they're about equivalent, but usually I need to know, Especially if the game has gunplay of any kind. Like, did you design this around mouse and keyboard? Are the levels designed around quickly moving to spot somebody else, or are they designed around like, oh, everybody's kind of within this particular cone, so it's easy to do with a gamepad, and you can aim pretty quickly and it's fine, right? I want to know. Tell me what you designed it around. Tell me if I need a gamepad. Tell me, hey, this game, you should play it with a gamepad, because like, it's a huge difference. I think I used to try to play Super Meat Boy on the keyboard, and recently I tried it on a gamepad, and I was like, wow, I used to really suck at this, and now I'm completely fine, right? Because, of course, and it does tell you, it does recommend it. Yakuza recommends a gamepad. Thank God. Like, give me the clear recommendation. I like it so much. It's so nice. Now let's get into something that I'm absolutely fascinated by and really interested to explore, which is, how does this tie in to creating games? Not just in terms of designing your hotkeys, but like, how can we use the metaphor of hotkeys to apply to your creative process? What are your hotkeys in terms of how you create things? That may seem a bit odd, but it'll come to make sense as we get through this next segment. In the same way that all video games have default settings and hotkeys, all humans have default settings and hotkeys. We all have a way of responding to the challenges that we run into, whether those be creative challenges or just your day-to-day challenges in life. Maybe when you run into a creative challenge or even a technical challenge, you look at it and you go, my God, this is so difficult, this is so challenging. I don't know how I'll ever get through this problem, so I'm going to step away. And then you go on Reddit. Maybe you go, I'm going to step away, and then you go for a walk. Maybe you say, I'm going to step away, and then you get just hammered. These are all different responses, right? And whichever one you're used to is the one that your finger is going to dash across the keyboard to try to hit. You're going to go, oh, that's the one. Boom. There it is. Maybe you go, I'm going to go to the library and start doing some research on this problem. Or, oh, I'm going to go break this down and take out a sheet of paper and write down individual things that I can do to break this problem apart and figure out a better way of approaching it. Now, if you've watched my stream, or even from listening to this podcast, you may have gotten an idea of what my defaults are, especially if you've been watching the stream. I have a tendency to run into a challenge and say, okay, I'm going to conquer this with the tools that I have at hand. And the tool that I have at hand is my large forehead. And so what I'll do is I will take my forehead and I will slam it against the brick wall that is this problem repeatedly until one of us gives. And it's going to be the brick wall. And I just believe it's going to be the brick wall. And then I just keep slamming my head against it. And then somebody in the chat goes, hey, Chris? And I go, yeah. And I just keep slamming my head against the wall. I'm like, what do you want? I'm kind of busy here. I keep slamming my head against the wall. And they go, hey, do you see the sledgehammer to your left and the giant crack in the wall 2 inches to the right? I'm like, yeah, what about it? As I continue headbutting. Like, maybe you should take the sledgehammer and hit it against the crack. And I'm like, I don't know how to pick up the sledgehammer. The sledgehammer looks heavy. I've never picked up a sledgehammer before. I know what I'm doing. Let me just do it my way. And then Jeff in the chat, Lethal Injection Games, is like, okay, man, there is a sledgehammer though. And I'm like, all right, whatever. And then eventually I like collapse from hitting my head against the wall. And then I land, and my left hand touches the base of this sledgehammer and happens to grab around it. And I'm like, oh, my hand is grabbing some kind of a handle. And then I like stand up while holding this handle, and I go, oh, I'm picking up a sledgehammer. And then I bring my other hand to it. I'm like, oh, I can pick up this sledgehammer. And I go up to the wall. I'm like, guys, check out this thing I just figured out. And I slam into the wall with the sledgehammer. Still very effectively, by the way. I probably just run full body straight at the wall, holding the sledgehammer out like it's a spear. And then like the back of the handle hits me in the sternum. And then it breaks the wall. And then Jeff in the chat goes, good job, Chris. Yeah, great job. You got it. That's what I told you to do 4 days ago. More often it's like 3 to 4 weeks ago. I'm like, no, but I had to figure it out on my own. And he's like, yep, you had to figure it out on your own. Okay, man. Okay. So like that's my default that I keep falling into is like, I don't want to learn a new tool. I kind of will, but I'm like, I still haven't figured out the one I'm using. I'm going to keep using this one. And then I just keep slamming my head against the wall instead of just pivoting to a new tool every time. I'm like, I'm reluctant sometimes to pick up a new tool and say, okay, how do I use this? Because I look at it and I go, that looks complicated. I've never done that before. Probably quicker to just do what I've been doing. And the fact of the matter is it's not. It's not quicker. In the same way, sometimes we can go, it's probably quicker to just keep going about my life the way I've been going about it instead of doing this interesting trick that seems kind of useful. And sometimes we got to learn the trick, man. You know, sometimes it's like, maybe I should go for a walk outside instead of playing a crap ton of Supermarket Simulator, which now I want to play tonight. I can't mention it without wanting to play it. I don't know what it is with that game. It's not even like, it's a job, but it gets me. It really sucks me in. I think it's something to do with the just like the grind of it. It's fascinating. Anyway, these default responses, these default settings, I think it can be useful to look at yourself and say, oh, that's a hotkey. That's not me. That's a way that I respond. And to notice that response, because in a lot of games, I don't notice the key bindings. I just assume that they're right. I go in and I go, oh, that's how I'm supposed to play the game. Let's play the game. Sometimes those aren't the key bindings for me. You know, it's getting better and better these days, better and better designed key bindings. But especially in a weird indie game, I ran into an indie game a while back that was a fishing game where I was losing it, man. The way that this menu navigation worked, I was gonna lose my freaking mind, and there wasn't really much I could do about it because it was kind of built from the ground up to be too many menus and kind of frustrating to navigate. So that was unfortunate. But like that, when it got that frustrating, that's when I started going, okay, I need to look at my defaults. I need to look at, see if I can change this stuff. And I ended up just giving up on the game. I didn't even look at the key bindings. Now that I'm thinking about it, I just gave up on the game because it was frustrating. Maybe I could have changed the key bindings. Maybe I did look and couldn't find them or something. I'd like to give myself that much credit, but I have a feeling I just ditched it. The point is, you can look at those settings. You can say, wait, maybe I'm just reacting automatically here in a bad way. Maybe I've got 2 key bindings for this thing, right? And one of them I'm really used to doing. I'm really used to hitting P, which is all the way across the keyboard. And I could hit 1 instead. And if I just stop jumping over to P and just start hitting 1 instead, I might get a little faster. Like, yeah, it's not that much faster. It's marginal, but it's going to add up over time, and it's going to be really nice. And then I can start putting the other key bindings on the left side of the keyboard, and so on and so on. Does this make sense why this analogy is exciting for me? Because it just seems so much less intimidating to look at it this way. To look at it and say, oh, it's not like, this is not like a behavior that I'm stuck doing, I think people feel like they're stuck responding the way that they respond to things. I'm focusing on creative challenges specifically here. You can broaden this out as far as you want, right? You can look at this and you can be like, oh, I'm talking about my responses to people in my life when there's conflict. You can look at it and you can kind of go down the therapy route with it, where it's like, oh, therapists are sort of experts in helping you rebind your hotkeys and change your default settings. But let's not go down that path right now. I think there's value in that. I think that's an interesting idea to explore, and I think that that's a good way of understanding what therapists do, because it makes it way less intimidating. Everybody just thinks they're broken, and then they're like, oh, I'm broken. I don't want to go to therapy for being broken. Like, I'm not broken. I'm fine. And yeah, you are. It's just default settings. You're just like, oh, I've been using a bad hotkey, and this therapist goes, hey, maybe use Q instead of P for that, because your left hand is over here, and people, you're gonna get like carpal tunnel eventually. So like maybe just use Q, and then you go, oh my god, I can use Q for that. I can use Q this whole time. I've been reaching over and hitting P. They look so similar, but they're all the way across on the keyboard. That's crazy. But instead, people look at it and they're like, "Oh my god, I can never go to therapy. That's insane. I'm not broken. Only broken people." Anyway, whatever. There's a whole cultural movement towards this. Anyway, I don't have to go in and do a deep dive in why therapy is fine, but reframing it as key bindings is fun to me. I like it. I think it's valuable. Let's focus on just the creative side of things. When you're making stuff, you have automatic responses. There's so many challenges when you're developing a game. What do you do when you run into a technical challenge? What do you do when you run into an art challenge, a music challenge? When you get overwhelmed by the sheer number of options, the number of things that you have to do in order to make this game that you're trying to make, what happens? When you have your first idea for the game, and then you go and you sit down to start working on it, and then you immediately freeze, what is that? What part of that made you freeze? Was it sitting down? Was it where you're sitting down? Where's the freeze happening? Is it the size of the idea? Do you need to break it down? Are you looking too far into the future? What little thing that you are doing in your own head can you notice and then go, what if I just do this instead? Would something change? And then you got to try some different hotkeys, man. Like, it's not, oh, this is the universal hotkey that works for everybody. Like I was saying earlier, some people love pinky dashing in Dustforce. I know that's like the most unrelatable analogy. Some people don't want WASD movement. Some people want to use the arrow keys. I like WASD, but maybe you want to use the arrow keys. Okay, fine, cool, use the arrow keys. It's fine. It works. Maybe you got to find what works for you. You know, maybe you love the gamepad. Maybe you're one of these strange people who likes a Mad Catz controller, and it's just like perfect for you. and so be it. There are games that have key bindings that are like WASD and like HJKU, which is kind of the right side of the keyboard for WASD, or like JKLI, I guess it would be. Like there's all sorts of ways to set up the hotkeys in a game to work for you. You might as well customize them to be right for you. If you have some cool idea for how it's going to work, customize it to be right for you. And there's all sorts of ways to customize your creative process. And talking about the creative process in this way where you're like, oh, well, I really just feel the inspiration from this, that, the other, that it sucks, right? I don't want to do that. I just want to say, look at what inspires you and gets in your way, and look at what your reactions to things are, and then go, is this the part in the process that's screwing me? I'll just try something else and see if that works a little bit better. Here's the question for you this week. What is your default response to overwhelming challenges? I've got two. One is excitement and two is giving up. I can either, depending on the challenge, depending on when it hits me, the angle, how long I've been looking at it, so on and so on, I'll either get really excited and it's kind of a process actually. I'll brainstorm a ton of ideas. I get really excited. I have this whole game plan. I have this whole vision in my head, and then I sit down with a piece of paper, and the first moment of taking a step forward kind of freezes, kind of catches. And oftentimes where that catch is for me is turning on the screen and getting started in the like application that I'm using to resolve the challenge, right? Getting started in the game development program, in the writing, I should just say game engine, in the text editor, in the pixel art editor, whatever it may be. Sometimes that is the challenge. And so I tried something, which we'll see if it works out or not, of just writing things out on paper a lot more before I pull that screen up. Because if I have more of a plan on paper, if I have it broken down a little bit more, it's a lot harder to ditch it. Because as soon as I pull up the program on the computer, I'm already on the computer. And if I get fully stuck on the computer, really easy to pivot to something else and get distracted. If I'm on a piece of paper and I haven't booted up the computer yet, a lot harder to pivot. So if I'm stuck, I can just be stuck with the sheet of paper, and it's fine. And like a minute of being stuck with a piece of paper while I kind of try to brainstorm something is way different from a minute of being stuck in a computer screen when I'm trying to brainstorm something. Because if I'm stuck in front of a computer screen for a full minute, you know I'm hitting Alt-Tab. You know I'm opening up YouTube and changing the playlist. You know in the worst case scenario, I'm just going to go, oh, what's going on the internet today? Let's check out what the internet gossip is. Or maybe I'm pulling up a little idle game. That's not really something I do, thankfully. I don't really pull up an idle game while I'm working on things. But, you know, the one I do is I pull up a YouTube playlist and find the right music for the vibe or whatever. And then I go back and I just like, I'm just not locked in. I'm just not focused. I'm not figuring it out. I'm distracting myself with other things. But if I'm sitting there with a sheet of paper, it's just a sheet of paper. Instead of pulling up a YouTube thing and trying to find the right playlist, I'm looking at a piece of paper and I'm going, what am I trying to say? What is this? Or if I get fully stuck, I just sit. I just sit for a minute. There's just nothing. I'm just thinking. I'm just figuring it out. Maybe I get there, maybe I don't. And then maybe I pivot to something else. But like, it just feels more under control when I'm not looking at the screen for it. So I'm hoping that that's a good new default hotkey for when I'm jumping in on an overwhelming project, because I think it'll give me more time to break down the overwhelming project. So just to repeat the question, and leave you on that note. Sorry, I just had like kind of a hiccup thing. Just to repeat the question and send you off here. It was, what is your default response to overwhelming challenges? Maybe you want to modify it, maybe you don't, but it's worth just looking at it and seeing what it is. That's all I got for you this week. Thank you. Thanks for joining me on this one. Thanks for listening this far. I love this topic. I'm fascinated by this topic. I'm so interested not just in all of the stuff we just talked about, like, creative process, but the idea of designing really good hotkeys for games. I also think like game controllers, I'm interested to see how that evolves, because I think touchscreens are still kind of not it. I think there needs to be like a weird merging of touchscreen and like physical controller, because like touchscreens, the physicality is not quite doing it for me. Anyway, it's fascinating to me. Very, very interesting stuff. But that's everything. I've got the stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 p.m. We started playing Elden Ring, dude. Whew. Elden Ring on Fridays, Hollow Knight's Monday, Wednesday right now. We're getting into it now. I'm excited to freaking play Elden Ring. It's been a long time coming. I played a little bit of it before, but like now I'm going to get to really sink my teeth into it, which is wonderful. And I'm going to get to bash my head against that wall over and over and over, as I tend to do. Maybe I'll learn my lesson, but that game's kind of designed for you to bash your head against a wall in some cases. It's kind of part of the fun, from what I understand. That's it. I'll see you in the next one. Get out there, make some stuff, and have fun with it. Bye-bye.